Where does the tape come out when it's done recording? And it's getting time. How do you turn this thing on? What is it? This one? It's on? Hi, guys. I'm Jerry. I'm going to introduce you to Moshe. For Christians, that's Moses. If you haven't read him, he's a very controversial figure. Slavery, taxes, women's rights, race relations, warfare, the poor, the rich, food, clothing, economy, criminal justice, morality, the list goes on. Moses is on the opposite side of almost every modern issue. Now, over the next episodes, I'm going to cover many of these subjects. Today, it is slavery, when one man owns another man, men or women. Now, we aren't going to waste time discussing the historical context. What was normal then instead of now? There's no need to attempt to justify Moses' opinions. Who cares? If we're right, he was wrong. But if he was right, we're wrong. Let's just look at them for what they are and compare our opinions to see if we might have missed something. Exodus, the book of Exodus, chapter 21, verses 2 through 11. These verses lay out regulations for Hebrew slaves. 21, 7 through 11 lays out female slaves. If a man sells his daughter into slavery, she should be treated as a daughter and not as a slave. Well, that's kind of interesting. Wouldn't have thought Moses said something like that. New to me. Now, let's go on to Leviticus 25, verses 39 through 43. Regulations about poor Hebrews selling themselves into slavery. If a fellow Hebrew becomes poor and sells himself as a slave, he should not be treated as a slave but as a hired worker. Son of a gun! Blows my mind. He and his family should be released in the year of Jubilee. Well, we're not going to get into the year of Jubilee. This has to do with mitigating pernicious economic cycles in complex economies. Moses was kind of savant, but son of a gun. All right. So Leviticus 25, verses 44 through 46, laws concerning foreign slaves. Ooh, there's a difference between Hebrew slaves and foreign slaves. That sounds racist. Foreign slaves can be bought and owned as property. They can be inherited as property and passed on to descendants. Wow. Okay. Deuteronomy 15, verses 12 through 18. Regulations about the release of Hebrew slaves. A Hebrew slave, as opposed to a foreign slave, must be released in the 7th year, and the master should provide for the freed slave generously upon his release. He cannot go free without money. Interesting. Deuteronomy 23, 15 to 16. This is instructions about runaway slaves, slaves that escape. Slaves who flee from their masters may not be returned. Once they run away, they can live wherever they choose. Wow. So that means if I were a slave owner in ancient Israel, and I made living conditions so bad for my slaves that they wanted to run away, couldn't get them back. They were gone. I'm screwed. Got to buy another one. Wow. the price of slavery at that time, which was about $6,000 per person. That would get expensive fast. I better make living conditions well enough so that the slave says, wow, if I run away, I got to provide for myself. Where am I going to find a house like this? Where am I going to find these clothes or food this good? Deuteronomy 24, verse 7, prohibition against kidnapping. Kidnapping and selling someone into slavery is prohibited, and the penalty is punishable by death. Well, let's think about this. Let's noodle on this for a second. So, in modern times, if I work at a factory and the factory falls off on orders, doesn't have enough work, just lays me off. Son of a gun, if I were a slave, I couldn't be laid off. If I were a slave in ancient times under these laws, my slave owner would not ever want to send me into town to do an errand dressed more shabbily than his neighbor's slaves. He'd want me dressed well. So I'd be wearing nice clothing. And I'd never have to worry about food. I'd never have to worry about, I couldn't get evicted from my house. Wouldn't have to worry about getting laid off. Which do we take care of better? Something we rent or something we own? If I buy a car, I'm going to make sure that car is taken care of. If I rent a car, I don't care. Modern factory workers, they're kind of rented by the hour. But a slave, the slave owner owns him. What guy buys a car and then slashes the tires? What guy spends good money on a slave and then treats him so badly that he wants to run away? No, he owns him. He wants him to do good, work well. Slavery's been a part of human history until 1807, when the United Kingdom, Britain, passed the first anti-slavery laws. Do we really think that an idea only 200 years old could be better thought out than an idea that is 5,000 years old? Interesting. Well, thank you, and join me again, same time, same channel, for Moses taking on taxes and women's rights. Okay, how do you turn this thing off? Where does the tape come out? I mean, did it really record?